Welcome to a presentation on the MFSQL connector database file connector. Let me start off by talking a little bit about the installation and the concept of the file connector. I'm going to use a vault called the MFSQL Demo Sage Vault, and we will go into the configuration and show you the basic setup for the file connector. The database file connector is an external repository which is based upon the mfiles IML technology, and as you can see, we have after the installation of the database file connector, we have set up two separate connections to external databases which have blob files in. So, very briefly, the configuration consists very similar to the, for instance, the network folder connector. It consists to, for instance, in terms of general settings, where we just enable it, and then the connection specific settings, and here we will actually specify the SQL Server or the Oracle Server, or which that you want to connect to, and the usually a view, but you can actually connect directly to a table if it has the required files. I'm not going to go into the technical detail of the installation. We will deal with that in a separate video, but I'm just using this as an opportunity to give you a quick overview. After the installation and the connection, you should see a dashboard where it indicates the validity of the license and the installation, and you can see that our connection is working. If we now go into mfiles, then we will see that we now have an external view of the files. If I use, for instance, the ERP customers, I can go into that and I can see a listing, and this listing is coming directly out of the database. We'll go and have a look at Alfred's futuristics files. If I click on that, I'll see the files, and if I select one of these files, I will now see the files which is an unmanaged object, where these files are actually directly from the blobs in the SQL database. If I go into one of these files, you obviously can't check it out because you cannot edit the files, but if I redo a read only, I can go into the file and I can see the file through my normal, and this access is to the actual blob file in the database. If I go back to SSMS, that particular file is filed in the Northwind database, and there is my blob files that I have in my database, and what I'm actually applying in this is I'm using a view, my customer file view, and this view is set up to effectively access the required files. It needs a GUID, it needs a file name, it needs the files, the bit information of the file, and then any other reference information that we want to add into the lookup in mfiles. little bit further in terms of exploration. For instance, I can do a preview of the file. Let's try. Maybe I'm a little bit too much in a hurry. So there's my preview of the file that I can actually you can work with this file, and if I search on it, for instance, in this case on the account, I'll get all of the files for the accounts. If I now say I want to sub and I just want to look at the ERP customer files, I get a subset for it. Quite interestingly, I have another database, but the same type of files is in that. If I actually select that, there's nothing for Alfred's in that loan data. I will look into that in a second to go and see whether we can get something that we can search for in the data. So effectively, you'll see that some of these files are standard M files, metadata files, and some of these files are unmanaged objects, and I can search on my account, and the account actually gives me all of the files for it that is related to it. So I can actually search on the system also. Interestingly enough, there is no file for Alfred's, but there's other files, for instance, for this other loan, the Blauer C. So if we go into and search for Blauer C, then I get all the files for Blauer. And if I want to just look at the files that is coming out of the loan database, and if I go and search for the files that's in the ERP database, and if I want to just see the files that is in the sales demo. And really, that is the power of the database file connector, because you can effectively point M files to a external external database with blob files in, and you can show those files and search for those files in M files and show it and view the files from M files. There is another functionality which is part of the MFSQL connector utility, whereby you can import the files that is in the blob into M files with its metadata. It works a little bit different than in the network folder connector. In the network folder connector, you would effectively right-click the file, and you would you would import the file directly. With the blob files, you will use a different routine to actually import it. It is also possible to change the unmanaged object and assign metadata to it by changing the class. For instance, I'm going to take this and make this a other document as for an example, and assign my account to it. And if I save this item, then this item actually now is a standard mfiles object with its associated metadata. However, we can recommend that instead of changing the metadata by changing the class, which need to be done on an item by item basis, that this is done by using the extended functionality of MFSQL connector that could not only change the metadata but bring the file into the domain of mfiles. It allows then for the file to be updated and to become part of mfiles, because if you just change the metadata, the file resides still in the database, that may be confusing to the customer because or to the user, because it looks like you can edit the file, but if the file is still residing in the database and therefore it is not updatable or editable. It's not a full file inside of MFiles. This concludes this presentation. Thank you for listening. Looking forward to get your questions.